mainly think of messages in terms of their content and what we want people to do once they see or hear it. We also need to think of where the communication takes place and who's the messengers. Remember, to be focused on the target group, you need to understand what your audience wants and where they get their information and where they communicate with others. So while you're busy implementing, take every opportunity to deepen your understanding of each audience segment and their preferred tools. Now, what about the various channels of communication and how do you build them into your strategy? One way of looking at communication channels is to divide them by owned, earned, and social. Please note, this is a professional distinction that's not used in development cooperation, so be aware of this. There might be moments where you want to show off your communications know-how, and other situations where you might irritate your colleagues because they find this too specific for how they are used to work with communications in development. Now, owned means your organization controls the medium. Everything like your website, your newsletters, your fact sheets, even advertisement, we get to that. There you have complete control of what's said in there, in which way it's said. And then you have earned. Earned means the channels that feature the information about your project, they do it because you got their attention. For example, any kind of media coverage that you get on your project, that's earned. And then there are social channels, which can be your own LinkedIn account or your project showing up on channels of others. Yeah. Beyond those three, you also have search, like Google, which is all about how your information is found. So there's quite a lot to it. For example, search engine optimization, SEO. So we cover this in a separate course in the future. Now, you start planning what you want to do in each of these 3 to 4 categories. The advantage of approaching it in this way and not immediately by looking at the individual tools or channels is that you have to do similar basic preps for each of these categories, which can make it easier for scaling up your activities during implementation later on. So the tools or channels you own, they're good for retaining all the information about your project and everything you want to share. You can keep this information and have full control over it. You can use it for linking back to it for as long as you want. This sort of your communication pool. So you want a lot of information there. And because you control the information, the links won't change without you knowing it. Just watch out for copyright before dropping materials. Usually, you cannot use materials from others on the tools you own. This is a very important issue for development cooperation, communications. On project level, the knowledge on basic copyright is very low. So this is also the subject for another mini course. For now, I recommend that you are very hesitant when other projects or stakeholders provide you with photos, etc. No matter what they tell you about the materials, legally the copyright issue will remain your responsibility. So you better have the supplier of the materials confirming that they own the copyright, at least in an email. This is also not 100% watertight, but in most cases, this is as good as it gets without irritating people who send you the materials. Now, working with earned channels, on the other hand, means primarily that you reach out to the media to use your information in their reporting. This has a couple of factors you should consider. 1. The media primarily operate with newsworthy information. Most projects don't have much that really falls into this category. And they will use information, the media, that they believe is important, not what you think is important. So don't try to make them change their perspective on their reporting. Your project or the project aims are likely to only play a minor part in most media stories. If that's the case, don't be disappointed. Remember, you're in it for a longer haul. You want to build a reputation with the audience and a relationship with the journalists. Even though the short-term nature of projects in development cooperation. Demands for immediate proof of impact make its sustainable media work difficult with relationship building. Yeah? Secondly, the media are likely to have a different, broader audience. They want to reach much more people, much more than what your project target group entails. So your information will be scattered all over instead of aiming it directly at your targets. And often your messages might get distorted even by the media. So this is a downside of classic media work, especially for development communications. Though it does always look like you're having a great reach. Third, there might be instances where you don't want to aim at your standard target groups. Maybe you have an event planned and you decide you want the local community to be present, to raise the level of their participation. Then a story in the local paper mentioning the upcoming event might be very useful. So working with earned media is special. I suggest that you get someone to help you out with setting up a sub-approach for it. So finally, you have social media. This is where you definitely want to be present as a development project, because it doesn't require much investment, has a great capacity for your information to spread, and you can always change the content of posts when the information you posted turned out flawed or facts changed in the meantime. Just remember, social media require for you to keep a constant flow of activity. You need to be responsive and interactive and appear relatable. These are aspects development cooperation projects struggle with. Social media accounts that are held by institutions per se lack personality, and official sign-off procedure make it hard to keep up with the fast pace on social media. What is also not liked on social media is when you only show up to ask people a favor, like sharing your posts, but you're never there to return the favors. This is also something development cooperation struggles with, mainly because the institutions want or have to control the interaction with others. But maybe if you consider social media the responsibility of the intern, then it would probably not be a good idea in the first place. To touch on an example that would also have to be covered in a separate course is working with influencers. This is a mix of different categories, but the distinction helps you to understand what you can do with influencers. Broadly speaking, are influencers people who have a sizable following on a social media channel, plus have a certain capacity to make people do or believe something. The second part is important because not every so-called influencer is necessarily really influencing in this sense. And those people are not people you want to work with when they don't have that sort of influence. As I said, without going into detail on this, working with them means you can provide them with your information and hope that they release it on their channels, ideally with positive comments and so forth. That would be the earned part of working with influencers. Then you could also invite them to your event in Europe to speak, or sponsor their equipment, or even pay them straight out. All that shifts your approach more towards owned. Whoever operates the social media accounts for you needs to have a good understanding of the project and finesse for politics around it. This usually requires knowing the players on your field more closely, something that cannot be acquired within half a year. Then that person needs to have the full trust of the project and organization to operate the accounts without constant oversight. By now, it should be clear that entrusting the social media accounts to the incoming intern is really a useless idea, maybe even detrimental. Besides, it's so cliche that young people are good with social media. To say that straight, they aren't, okay? They aren't. Each part of your communication strategy implementation should integrate on social media. Consider which platform specifically makes the most sense. You don't want to start out on too many different ones. concentrate. For instance, Instagram is mostly visual, so you need to constantly have access to great images and graphics. Twitter is very fast in linking back, good in linking back to your website. It works with news, which development projects don't really produce. I mentioned it before. LinkedIn is really up and coming as a network of professionals and works well for development cooperation, especially homebound targeting. We get to that. You can also use Facebook, which has possibilities for really gigantic reach worldwide and to all sorts of audiences. There are many options, and you shouldn't restrict your thinking to digital tools. Conceptualizing a series of off-the-record roundtables for journalists at a retreat venue or proprietors of factories in a certain industry can also be a great way to promote your project goals, which will need support with very specific communications. Important is to think through all of these implications as you plan your strategy and implement your communications. So wade in slowly. Start with 1 or 2 social media platforms before you try to create a presence in all of them. That's because a good social media presence means you have enough content to show up on that platform consistently and thoughtfully. So don't stretch yourself too thinly by trying to be everywhere all at once. Instead, build a good community on 1 or 2 platforms. You'll find that you'll have much farther reach that way. Ultimately, a good communication strategy should be cross-channel. That means that for each message, you have really thought about ensuring it shows up in all of the 3 areas we've outlined. If you can find a way for your strategy to start with owned and move into social and earned, you've done a great job, ensuring your communication is noticed widely. The reach of your message is your ultimate goal, and working across channels is the best way to get the largest reach. You might want to consider working with local influencers. We will cover that as well in a separate course, how to identify and engage with them. One more tip from my side that might be worth your consideration. It concerns advertisement and social media. This is a highly undervalued tool for development cooperation. I guess the reason might have to do with prejudices or cliches about advertisement that exists on the side of the client and project leads who often categorically disregard advertising. Maybe it also is a perception of money going to waste when spending it on advertisement, which is strange if you think of it. Businesses spend money on advertisement and they certainly don't have budgets to waste. Now, without going into more detail on this either, there is a form of promoting your content on social media by paying for it to be boosted beyond your network. To do this is extremely cheap in comparison to traditional advertising and can also be extremely well targeted. Let me wrap this up by saying it doesn't make sense to pay for professional support with designing fancy invitations or memes or getting images photoshopped, this sort of thing, but then not to use budget to promote it further on the channels, not only as a matter of principle, but also in terms of looking at it from a point of cost effectiveness of your product.